Well, hi everyone. Today we've got Lewis Shaw from Shaw Financial Services on the Business Inspires podcast. I'm really looking forward to interviewing Lewis, finding out about his journey, and let's see what he can share with us in terms of some inspiration for if you're on your own business journey. So, Lewis, welcome to the podcast session today. Can you just give us an introduction to your business and the problems you solve for people?
Hi, Rod. First, thanks for inviting me. And yeah, of course. So we're an independent mortgage brokerage, and we help people, whether that's for the first time or they're moving home, arrange the right mortgage and help them purchase that home with the minimum of fuss, as efficiently as possible, and with as little stress as necessary. So that's a very, very short and neat potted answer, I hope.
Yeah, well, you obviously do it very well. I was on your website earlier, and there's lots of 5-star Google reviews there, so you're obviously pretty good at it.
Well, I mean, I've been doing it now a little over a decade. Not my own business, but I've been in the industry for a little over a decade. So you'd hope that you'd hope that I'd get it right by now. If I hadn't, then something would definitely be going wrong.
Brilliant. Oh, it's always good to get. Well, they say, what is it? They say you are who Google says you are. So certainly you're well up there. So what inspired you to run your own business?
It was really, I suppose it was fate, coincidence, however you want to phrase it. I suppose I fell into it in a sense. So prior to being a mortgage advisor, I was in a very, very different career. I was in the armed forces. And unfortunately, I was medically discharged. And when you're medically discharged from the armed forces, there's an amount of money that's provided called resettlement, and it's enabled you to move from military life back into civilian life, because of course it's a big change. And they provide an amount of money that you can use to retrain. You contribute some of whatever course it may be. At the time, it was they would cover 80% if you paid 20%. So there's this pot of cash, and I didn't have any clue what I should do. And one of my friends, Mark, who I'd been at university with, was an independent financial advisor in London, and suggested, well, how about doing something in the financial sector? I said, well, I don't really have the time to spend years on courses, etc. And he mentioned mortgage advice. So I looked into it. It seemed like a reasonable choice. But the one thing that did pique my interest was that there were fast track courses available at the time by specific learning providers that the military kind of signed off on. And it allowed me to gain my qualification on a fast track crash course type scenario in a fortnight. So I made my contribution, the armed forces contributed the remainder, and I went down to Southend-on-Sea to do a residential training course, which took me through all the aspects of learning how to pass the exams, but also learning all about the mortgage industry and how to deliver advice, financial conduct authority, rules and regulations that you have to understand and abide by. And that was my route into becoming a mortgage advisor. So it was chance, it was fate. I don't know however we want to phrase that, but that's how I ended up. So it wasn't a conscious choice in so much as I decided actively to pursue it. But I'm pleased I did, and I seem to have taken to it reasonably well. And it's a career choice that I think sometimes I can't imagine there's many people that, you know, particularly students at school or in whatever career they may be in, ever wakes up and thinks, do you know what, I really fancy mortgage advice. Of course, there's going to be a few, but it's not as though it's, you know, an astronaut or a fast jet pilot or a footballer. But actually, it is actually a very rewarding job. Parts of it, of course, are stressful, but I do find it rewarding, particularly with first-time buyers, helping them to navigate the interminable maze that is the UK property market.
So building a business up, you know, have been through the training, starting on day one with the training, and suddenly I've got no clients. I've got to start building a client base. You know, what's been the hardest thing you've been through, and how did you overcome it?
Certainly, the biggest challenge is marketing. I think marketing is the biggest challenge, but also the biggest learning curve. The one thing that I've taken from running my own business, which I've been doing now for almost 6 years, is realizing that most people well, myself included, we like to think of ourselves as rational animals, but actually we're really not. We're very much emotional animals, and we tend to justify afterwards. And that was quite difficult for me to get my head around, because I like to think of myself as relatively analytical. I'm probably wrong there, but I think that's how I probably see myself. And certainly marketing and getting inside the psychology of people's minds, what do they want? And I quickly realized that it doesn't necessarily matter how good you are at what you do. It's whether people know what you do that matters. Because you can be the best mortgage advisor, you can be the best solicitor, you can be the best, car polisher, whatever it is you do. But if no one knows about you, it doesn't matter. Conversely, you can be very mediocre at what you do, and there's not, but if people know what you do and they come back to you and continually use you, then you can have a thriving business. And I found that a bit jarring. I just assumed you just had to be good at what you did. But if people don't know about you, then that's a really, really big part of having a business. So that was one of the things that took me a bit of time to get my head around. And certainly, I think when you run a small business, as I do, and many people do, you have to wear a lot of hats, whether that's accounting, marketing, doing your actual job, admin, taxation, all that kind of stuff. And there's a huge learning curve. And I would encourage anyone, and I do think I genuinely believe this, I think most people would benefit from attempting to start a business, whether it succeeded or failed, simply because you learn so many different parts of human psychology, of how people are, of how to deal with people, of coming up with ideas, living off your wits' end sometimes. And I think those transferable skills aren't something that can necessarily be taught. You just have to go through them. And I think if more people did that, I think that could only be beneficial, just generally, if I'm honest.
Interesting. So out of all of those, what would be the biggest learning? Would it be that marketing, or was there something else in terms of being the business owner? What would be the biggest learning you've taken away?
I think communication. I think certainly communication is one of the biggest things. That does feed into marketing, of course, because how you say something, how it's going to be received. But talking to consumers, talking to customers, talking to clients, I think communication is the key, because we have a tendency to, when we talk to anyone, we always know what we've got going on in our heads. And so when we say something or we design something for marketing purposes, then we know what we're trying to get across. And so when we look at something, or when we read a sentence back, or when we're saying something to someone, we have a blind spot that we can't see how it actually comes across all the time. And so I think communication and the clarity of communication, that's one of the big things that I've taken from this. So I think that's improved my ability to help consumers, but also just more generally in my own personal life, in my day-to-day dealings with anyone and everyone, making sure that when you're asking questions, that you're really, really clear, and when you give an answer, you're very clear. So I think communication is probably the biggest part of that.
Wow. So would you do anything differently if you started over again?
I would do many, many things differently. But then on the flip side of it, so I mean, what would I do differently? I would have spent more time and care in my first website. I'd have gone on office sooner, so I could put myself on, do these are business, kind of specific business things, right? For example, making sure you get coverage by Google Maps, those kinds of things. On the flip side of that, I think that you have to go through those pain points, you have to make those mistakes, because realistically, that is the only way that you learn. And I know that sounds incredibly cliched, but it is true. And I don't think there's a better teacher than constantly falling and getting back up, and falling and getting back up. And there's a whole piece there about resilience, particularly, for any business. In the past 5 years, we've seen so many radical changes to the way that business operates. We've seen the nature of work change. We've seen interest rates up and down. We've, of course, have had the pandemic, which was a shock to everyone. And I think that that kind of level of resilience is beneficial just generally.
Brilliant. So you've obviously grown over the last few years in terms of the 6 years you've been in business, and looking to grow more. What do you attribute the growth down to?
I think longevity is just being around makes a big difference, but continually doing the job to as high a standards as you can, no matter what you do, no matter what industry, no matter what profession, no matter what skill or service you have, you can always improve and you can always do a little bit better, and you can always be searching for that constructive criticism. And it's just turning up and doing the same thing, formulating the right habits and doing a good job. There is no substitute for that. People can smell BS a mile off. And I think the more forthright and the more frank you are with people, the more honest and transparent you are, that can never let you down. So I think it's just about the continual day-to-day good habits that you can lay down and keep doing, even when times are tough, even when things are against you, even when the chips are down. If you can get up with a smile on your face and it's a new day, that's probably I'd say that's probably one of the biggest factors in any kind of success.
Amazing. So you're sort of 6 years in. Do you have any sort of plan of where you want to be in, say, another 5 years' time?
I do. I do. However, given the last 5 years and the changes that we've seen and the tumultuous ride that we've all had, I wouldn't like to necessarily put a pin in a map and say that's the destination that I'm going to arrive at. So I did used to plan much more meticulously, or at least try to. But the best laid plans of mice and men are gonna lay, as we've been told. So I now focus more on habits and doing the right things. And rather than searching for growth or profit, I find that my biggest wins have come from doing the job correctly, doing the job to my best of my ability, and that will lead me to the places that I may not even have seen on a map. So I would like to grow the team. I would like to help more people. But whether that happens or not, I'll be very happy with wherever I get to.
Fantastic. So there's a lot of talk about AI at the moment. Do you think AI is going to have an impact, particularly on what you do?
I think AI will have an impact. It's very much how we will have an impact. I think there are a lot of people that do my job that have been fearful that their jobs could be replaced by AI, although I'm not one of those. I don't sit in that camp. I don't think that's necessarily going to happen. I think, if anything, AI will enhance what people do rather than replace what people do, particularly in a regulated financial environment, because ultimately the regulator needs to apportion blame to someone. You can't really put an algorithm in the dock, but you can put a person there. So I think that AI will certainly make things more efficient, and God knows we need it in the property market. It's an absolute nightmare for many people these days when they're trying to buy a home. It's a very disjointed process, or it can feel like that. There can be a lot of miscommunication, and I'm sure that AI will, over time, improve that and make things more efficient and hopefully more productive. But I'm not fearful for AI, no.
I love that analogy. You can't put an algorithm in a dock. It's brilliant. I like that. It's true, but it's so obvious. But yeah, it is. We're still going to need people to interpret and communicate as well. It can't all be left down to AI. Do you think there's any other economic challenges, or any particular economic challenges that we might have here? I know we haven't got a crystal ball, but from where you're seeing at the moment, that for 2025, and are you preparing for anything in particular?
I am preparing for the economy, I suppose, to take a slight dip over the next few months as the new minimum wage takes impact alongside the national insurance rise for employers. I think those two policies hitting at the same time may turn out to be counterproductive. I don't want to sound as though I'm against people having a higher wage. I'm absolutely not. I'm very much in favour of that, because, of course, you know, the more money that people have in their pockets, then the more money they have to spend in our economy. So that I'm a fan of. But I think it could have been a misstep for those two things to hit at the same time. So I am a bit concerned about that, and I don't want people to be seeing job losses. That can be disastrous for people, particularly if they own a home and they have a mortgage, but regardless if they're renting. So I do have concerns about that. And I think the global economic picture isn't looking particularly rosy, but certainly because of the impact of tariffs, whether we have tariffs, whether we don't, it seems to change on a day-by-day basis, but also the conflict in Europe as well. So there are many, many challenges. Although that said, the UK doesn't seem to have hit its stride for quite some time. And so whilst many people seem to be down on the UK, I'm quite hopeful that if we can hit our stride, we do have a lot to offer. For a start, not least the language, two, that we can be a hub between Europe and the US. There are many, many things that we should be hopeful for. It's whether we've got the people in the right places to make those connections and get things firing on all four cylinders is the big question. And that bit, I think, it remains to be seen.
Interesting. So where is your number one focus in the business right now?
I think it sometimes can come across as cliched and sound quite twee, but I do really enjoy helping first-time buyers for a couple of reasons. One, I think it's a foundational part of being British, kind of trying to buy your own and own a home. Some people aren't fortunate enough to be in that position. I recognise that, but I do have a passion for first-time buyers, simply because they often face the biggest challenges. And I feel as though I can add the most value, because it is confusing buying a home, taking out a mortgage, navigating the legal system, trying to understand what survey you need, dealing with estate agents, negotiating prices. These are things that we don't get taught in school. We don't get taught financial management. Not that I'm a financial planner, of course I'm not. I'm a mortgage advisor, but those kinds of things, I seem to be able to add more value to first-time buyers, which then of course give me a bit of a glow afterwards. So I'm heavily focused on that element, and at the moment I'm trying to develop a tool or a course that can help educate first-time buyers on the process of buying, but not just that, but kind of financial literacy just generally. I mean, we always hear from parents that we get told about how we get taught to use the Pythagoras theorem at school, or how to solve a quadratic equation, but we don't get taught about credit cards and how interest rates work, and what actually is a mortgage, and how to manage your finances, and what is a credit score, and why do they matter, and what impact can they have. And I think there's a bit of a gap there, and hopefully I may be able to fill that gap, hopefully successfully, but that remains to be seen.
No, that's so true. No, that's really, really interesting. So just remind us, obviously you've talked about your passion about helping first-time home buyers, but can you just remind us again the problems that you solve for people and how you help people? Yeah,
sure. So it's three parts really. It's making sure that they understand what they can buy. So it's helping to frame what is a budget for them in terms of, can they buy a house at £100,000, or can they afford to buy a home at £300,000? But then it's all about the mortgage really. It's all about the mortgage, making sure they get the right mortgage deal, making sure that it's affordable, making sure that it's sustainable. But importantly, making sure that they understand what they're actually signing up to, because the world that I inhabit is full of jargon, it's full of technicalities, and it's full of complex interest rates and things like that. And making sure that that is understandable and people are really aware of what they're doing is the part that I think is most important. But it's taking people, in a very basic way, it's taking people from not being a homeowner to getting the keys in the hand so they can get on with their life and decide what they're going to do with the rest of it.
Amazing. So if people want to find out more or talk to you and see how you can help them, how's the best way to get hold of you, Lewis?
Generally via the website, which is shorefinancialservices.co.uk. But a good place to find me and learn a bit more about mortgages, whether they choose to use me as a mortgage broker or not, would usually be on social media, so Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, those kind of places, where I do try to have some content out there that can help educate, whether that's buying a home, moving home, the actual, kind of what's going on with the economy and that type of thing. So either the website or on social media are the two best places.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for your time today, Lewis. That's been really interesting, particularly around the marketing, the communication, the resilience, that you needed, and in terms of what you've done to build your business over the last 6 years. So that's been really good, really interesting. So thanks for your time.
Thanks for inviting me, Ronnie. Appreciate it.